I heard the fourth line die before I understood what I was hearing, and it was the pattern of it, not the silence itself, that told me something was wrong. Copper Ridge dropped first at 9:08, clean and sudden, the way a line drops in a storm. Bitter Creek went next, 4 minutes later, then Antelope Wells. Then, at 17 past, the eastern trunk line to Cheyenne itself went dark under my key, and I sat in the lamplight of the Wolf Creek Depot with 4 dead lines in a row and understood the way you understand a thing in your stomach before your mind agrees to it. That no storm on God's earth takes down telegraph wire in that particular order, one relay station at a time, moving east to west like a man walking a fence line with cutters in his coat. I took my father's old Henry rifle off the wall pegs where it had hung unused since he died, and I took the lantern and I went out the depot's back door into a night gone suddenly, deliberately quiet. The pole nearest the water tower had been cut clean, a fresh pale scar in the wood 8 feet up where a man would need a ladder or a horse to reach it, the severed wire curling on the ground like something that had died mid-word, still faintly warm where the cutters had bitten through the copper. The night smelled of coal smoke and frost, and something else underneath it, horse sweat and gun oil close by. I heard boots on gravel before I heard anything else, and I doused the lantern and went down flat behind the tower's stone footing as 2 riders walked their horses past at a deliberate, unhurried pace, rifles across their saddles, bandanas pulled up over the bottom half of their faces, even though there was no dust to knead them. One of them said something low I couldn't catch. The other laughed, short and quiet, the laugh of a man who thinks the night already belongs to him. I ran. Not toward the depot, toward the jail, boots pounding the frozen ruts of Wolf Creek's one real street.
Keep running.
The Henry rifle heavy and unfamiliar in my hands, my breath tearing at the cold air. A shot cracked behind me, close enough that I heard it pass, and I put a woodpile between myself and the dark before I let myself feel the fear of it. I made the jailhouse door in under 2 minutes with my lungs on fire, and my father's rifle still somehow in my grip, and I hit it hard enough that Deputy Caleb Ford came up out of his chair, reaching for his own gun before he'd fully processed that it was me. 5 lines are down, I told him before he could ask. Cut, not storm broke. Cut in sequence, east to west, and there are riders at the water tower armed and waiting on something. And the only thing worth waiting on in Wolf Creek tonight is the 940 from Cheyenne with the Silver Bow payroll on it. Caleb Ford looked at me the way he had looked at me for the 3 months since he'd taken the deputy post, which was the look of a man deciding how much of what a woman says deserves his full attention. That's a considerable amount of trouble to invent, he said, for one dark night. I didn't invent the wire, I said. Go look at it yourself. Somewhere out past the depot, faint but unmistakable, a train whistle sounded twice against the cold October air, still miles off but coming steady down the grade, carrying $11,000 in mining payroll into a town that could no longer call for help. That was when Caleb Ford stopped arguing with me and started reaching for his hat. I was 26 years old that October of 1886, and I had run the Wolf Creek Telegraph office for 3 years since my father's heart gave out at his key one February morning with a half-finished message still clicking under his hand. Nathaniel Vance had taught me the code before he taught me my letters, sitting me on a crate beside his chair from the time I was 6, and by the time I was 15, I could take dictation faster than he could speak it. When the railroad superintendent in Cheyenne learned the operator at Wolf Creek had died, he sent a wire asking whether the station needed a replacement, and I sent one back before the undertaker had finished with my father, informing him the station already had one. Western Union paid a trained operator $40 a month in those years, considerably more than most women in the territory could earn any other honest way, and a full $10 above what the mercantile paid its best clerk, a fact I had learned mattered a great deal to the men who came through Wolf Creek, assuming the wire office was run by someone with a beard. I had never once in 3 years let anyone in Cheyenne discover that the operator signing herself N. Vance wore a skirt to work, and I had gotten very good, over those 3 years at keeping my letters brief enough that the question never had cause to arise. The town had opinions about this, the way towns always do about a woman doing a man's work competently and without apology. Most of Wolf Creek had made its peace with it. Deputy Caleb Ford, new to the badge and new to the territory, had not yet made his, and in 3 months of crossing paths with him at the depot and the mercantile and church on Sundays, I had watched him treat my every observation about the town's business as an interesting notion requiring verification from someone more reliable. It had made me dislike him considerably before I found any particular reason to notice that he was, without question, the most striking man Wolf Creek had produced or attracted in years. Bronze skin weathered gold by a summer of range work before he took the badge, black hair, a jaw you could set a level against, blue eyes that missed very little even when his mouth was busy doubting me. I had noticed this the way you notice weather, factually and with some irritation, and had done my best to file it under things that changed nothing. There had been one evening, 3 weeks before, when Caleb had walked me home from the depot after a late shift and stood too long at my gate without finding a reason to leave, turning his hat in his hands the way men do when they have arrived at the edge of a sentence and lost their nerve about finishing it. "I've been meaning to say," he'd started, and then a wagon had rattled past loud enough to swallow whatever came next, and by the time it passed, he had simply told me good night and walked off into the dark. And I had stood at my own gate a long while wondering what the rest of that sentence might have been, and deciding it was foolish of me to wonder at all. Reeve Calloway had been planning the Wolf Creek job for 4 months, ever since a paid man inside the Silver Bow mining office had told him the October payroll would run heavier than usual. Back pay for the summer cruise added to the regular shipment close to $11,000 in gold and scrip. Calloway was 44 years old and had been robbing trains and stage lines across 3 territories since before the war ended, long enough to have learned that the difference between a robbery that worked and one that ended in a rope was almost never the robbery itself. It was the 15 minutes immediately after, when a town that still had a telegraph could put every lawman within 80 miles onto your trail before you'd cleared the county line. Cut the wires clean, in the right order, far enough ahead of time that no one thought to check them until it was too late to matter, and a man had the whole night and half the next morning before anyone outside Wolf Creek even knew there'd been trouble. He had 6 men with him, all of them professional in the particular sense that mattered to Calloway, meaning none of them got excited and none of them asked questions about the plan beyond the parts that concerned their own piece of it. Caleb and I reached the depot with the whistle sounding a 3rd time, closer now, and found it already occupied. 2 of Calloway's men had taken the platform, and a 3rd stood at the water tower controls where the train would stop to fill its boiler, exactly the moment and the exact spot where a slow-moving locomotive became easiest to board. Caleb got off 1 shot before they scattered for cover, and I got the depot's side door bolted behind us with my hands shaking so badly it took 3 tries, bullets splintering the frame an inch from my shoulder on the 2nd try. "We're trapped in here," Caleb said, which was observably true and unhelpful. "Not if the relay south of town still answers," I said. "There's an old spur line to the water company depot 4 miles down. Abandoned since '83, but the wire's still strung, and if I can raise anyone on it before that train reaches the platform, they can flag it from the water company crossing, and it never stops here at all." Caleb looked at the bolted door taking fire and then at me. "That's your plan," he said. "That's the only plan I've got," I said, "and it's better than waiting in here to die of one of yours." The key to reaching the old spur line ran through a junction box bolted to the outside wall of the depot, 12 feet up a support post, directly in the line of fire from the platform. I had climbed that post 100 times as a girl learning the trade at my father's knee, his voice calling up encouragement from the ground below, patient in a way he rarely was about anything else. I had never climbed it with men shooting at the building it was attached to, and some small, cold part of my mind noted that my father had died at his key rather than run from trouble, and that I came from people who did not, as a rule, choose the safer thing. Caleb went out first, drawing fire toward the platform side while I went up the post on the blind side, splinters tearing my palms, the old iron rungs half rusted and slick with October cold. I reached the junction box with my ears ringing from the gunfire below and my hands remembering, before my mind fully caught up, exactly which wires my father had taught me to strip and twist and key. I sent the distress signal in the old code my father had used before Western Union standardized the modern one, praying the water company's nightman still remembered it well enough to understand a woman screaming for help in dots and dashes from a rooftop under fire. He did. The flag went up at the water company crossing 4 minutes before the 940 reached it, and the engineer, seeing red lantern signals, swung hard across the tracks, put the brakes to the wheels 1.5 miles short of Wolf Creek Station, and Reeve Calloway's entire carefully built 15 minutes of silence collapsed into nothing, because the one thing he had never accounted for was a woman who knew a second language for the wires he thought he'd cut clean through. Calloway did not take the collapse of his plan well. He came off the platform with his revolver up, shouting for his men to fall back to the horses, and it was Caleb who put himself between Calloway and the post I was still clinging to 12 feet off the ground, taking a graze across his upper arm that spun him half around and put him on one knee in the dirt. I came down that post faster than I had ever come down anything in my life, my father's Henry rifle somehow still slung across my back, and I put myself between Calloway's second shot and the man kneeling in the dirt, and fired, my hands steadier than they had any right to be, and put Reeve Calloway down in the frozen mud of the Wolf Creek platform with a bullet through his shoulder that ended his robbing career considerably before the rope eventually would. His remaining men scattered into the dark without him. By the time the sheriff's posse from Laramie reached Wolf Creek the following noon, alerted by the water company's own working wire, there was nothing left to do but collect Calloway and 2 of his men from the jail cell where Caleb had put them, and take statements about a night that the Cheyenne paper would later describe, with considerable understatement, as an attempted robbery successfully repelled by local authorities. I sat with Caleb on the depot steps afterward while the doctor wrapped his arm, the eastern sky just beginning to go grey at the edges, both of us too wrung out for anything but plain talk. "You climbed a post under gunfire," he said, "to send a message in a code nobody's used in 15 years. "It worked," I said. "It worked because you knew something I didn't. And I spent 3 months deciding that wasn't possible," he said. "I'm sorry for that." "I'll take the apology," I said, "but I'd have taken you believing me the first time considerably more." He was quiet a moment, turning that over the way he turned over most things, slow and thorough. "It wasn't that I thought you were wrong," he said finally. "It was that I'd never had to depend on anyone else's judgment over my own before, and I didn't know yet how to do it without it costing me something." "Did it?" I asked. "Cost you something?" He looked down at the bandage on his arm and then back up at me. "Considerably less than not depending on it would have cost the whole town," he said. He looked at me a long moment in the greying light, blue eyes steady on mine in a way they had never quite been steady before, and said that he intended to spend considerably more time believing me from here forward, if I'd allow him the chance to prove it. I told him I supposed Wolf Creek could spare 1 telegraph operator for 1 supper, provided he didn't argue with anything I said across the table. He didn't, not that evening, and not for the rest of a long life spent in a town that eventually stopped needing to have opinions about a woman who had once climbed a telegraph pole under gunfire to save it, because by then everyone in 3 counties knew the story and told it in the years after, the way you tell a story about someone you're proud to claim as your own. The lines went back up within the week, restrung by railroad crews sent out from Cheyenne, and I sat at my key that winter sending routine freight schedules and weather reports down wire that had, not so long before, carried the only warning that stood between Wolf Creek and a very different October morning. Caleb took to stopping by the depot most evenings after his rounds, not always with a reason, and I took to expecting him without ever quite admitting that I did. Some nights, keying out the day's last message before closing the office, I would think about the particular silence of those 4 dead lines, one after another, and how close the whole territory had come to losing $11,000 and considerably more than that, and how the only thing standing between a quiet October night and disaster had been a code most men had long since forgotten, and a woman who had never once forgotten it. My father used to say a telegraph line only mattered in the moment somebody needed it most. He never lived to see how right he was about that, or how much more than wire could travel down one, in the right hands, at the right hour. Caleb asked me, that following spring, sitting on the same depot steps where he'd first said he was sorry, whether I intended to keep running the office alone for the rest of my life. I told him I supposed that depended on whether he intended to keep showing up in the evenings without a reason. He said he'd been meaning to give me one. I told him I already knew what it was, and had known for some time, and that he was welcome to say it out loud whenever he stopped being afraid I'd argue with the answer. He wasn't afraid for long. We married that June in the depot yard itself, under the same water tower where the wire had first gone silent the night everything changed, because I told him plainly I wasn't getting married anywhere that didn't have a working telegraph key within shouting distance, and he'd learned by then not to argue with anything I said about wire.